Welcome to what surely will be a doozy of a matchup right here, sports fans. Whether your game is on the gridiron, at the diamond, or on the links, we can only say, get up off your seats and get ready for some real action. Welcome to this week's Huddle Up with Gus. 15-year NFL quarterback Gus Frerott's passion for sports has taken him on the field and behind the benches, playing for 7 NFL franchises with 114 TDs under his belt. Gus knows who the players are and how the games are won.
It's not every day you get to hang out with an NFL quarterback, huh?
Okay, sports fans, from the decked out and plush 1631 digital studios, it's kickoff time. So snap your chin straps on and get ready to huddle up with Gus.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Huddle Up with Gus. I'm your host, Gus Frerotte, 15-year NFL quarterback, and I'm excited to have you on the show today. We're going to get into a lot of great discussion that if you're an athlete, even if you work in business, how this next guest of mine can really help you. But check me out at my website, huddleupwithgus.com. If you like our podcast, please like and subscribe. And, wherever you listen to your podcast, it can be on any one of the many networks out there. Go check us out. We're on almost all of them. So check me out at Huddle Up with Gus and on social media. So today's guest is a very good friend of mine. We have a lot of great, deep discussions. A man that's very knowledgeable and I think can help many people look at themselves in a way that they've never done before and can help them improve. So today joining me is my good friend, Dr. Gary Russell. Gary, how are you doing today, buddy?
Good, man. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be on with you. I've watched you over the years. We've had many discussions, and it's just an honor to be sitting here talking to you.
Yeah, we have had many discussions, and, I wanted to ask you, because we've talked a lot about currently and maybe kind of how you started your company Winning Profile, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I wanted to ask you first about when you fell in love with sports.
Oh, well, I was one of those dead-end kids that played out in the dirt, and I was the key kid in the neighborhood who could wrap baseballs that the covers fell off. So I used to get white tape and tape them all up. So every day out in the dirt playing, no matter what season it was, it's just an exciting part of life. It still is.
Yeah. So when you say you're the key guy to wrap a baseball, is there something hard about wrapping a baseball?
Well, apparently everybody else thought there was, or I was too stupid to believe that I was the one that could. But my mom used to buy this white tape, which we use on bandages. And, and I very meticulously spent time wrapping the ball so that when we took it out, it looked brand new, and all the silly things that kids do. But it was fun. It was so much fun. Did
you draw the little red lines on it?
No.
You wrapped it.
My profile wouldn't allow me to do that.
Yeah. So what area where did you grow up?
I'm a Philly boy. So I grew up there, went to college in Pennsylvania, Kutztown State. Come on. Went on to Duquesne University to get my master's and then my doctorate at University of Pittsburgh, and then finished at California Coast in LA.
Well, you've been around. So when you were growing up, did you have an idol? It sounds like you were very into baseball. Did you have an idol like that you followed with the Phillies? Were you Philly? I'm sure you were a Phillies guy.
I was, until they put a dagger in my heart. One year, I think they were up 8 games with 7 days to go, and I can't remember the exact numbers, and they lost the pennant. And I swore then I was finished. But Pete Rose was my idol in terms, or Richie Ashburn, who plays center field for the Phillies. These were not the biggest people on earth, and they weren't home run hitters, but they always got on base. And as we know, Pete Rose, Charlie Hustle, and all that stuff. I just looked up to them as people I wanted to model my life. Not so much Pete's later years.
Yeah.
Years.
You were fixing the baseballs when you were taping them up.
Yes.
So you go through all this in your life, and what was your So when you were young and you're going on to college to get your master's, to get your PhD, your doctorate, all that stuff, so what was your purpose when you were in college, and what were you thinking of, hey, this is what I want to do the rest of my life?
It's an interesting question because I'm still thinking what I'm going to say was, it doesn't take someone very bright to realize that all human beings are different. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But I was fascinated what was causing the difference. What was inherent in the idea of performance or behavior or talent. So I began literally my studies then, which is over 50 years ago, which is interesting because I'm only age 6 now, so we'll go with that. I'm still pursuing it. I'm still trying to figure out this equation of performance.
Was there, like we talked about who you looked up to in baseball, was there somebody that you looked up to in the field that you wanted to, in this talent and this profiling and how to figure out somebody's performance and their emotion, mental state, all those things that you always talk about? Was there somebody that you looked up to in education or this field that you were into?
Yeah, there was a gentleman named Carl Rogers who wrote the book on becoming a person. And it was I always felt there was something about the way people interacted. There was, I knew effective people. And when I read his book on becoming a person, he was a psychologist or psychotherapist who wrote the book because he wasn't helping anybody get better. A minor flaw in therapy, but he at least admitted it. And he went on to study other people who were having success and came up with about 5 key points that would make the difference in terms of you being a coach, teacher, parent, whatever. And that it's on my bookshelf right now, and it's something I refer to all the time.
What were those 5 key points?
Oh, now you're putting me under the gun here. The first one's freedom, which is the idea of giving people the opportunity to speak and talk and chat, which is something even in this 2022 we haven't learned yet. Whether it's sport, and you know that, you experienced it, whether it's a parent, and helping people to learn to have a voice. The other one was what was called unconditional positive regard, which is demonstrating that you basically love somebody no matter what. And the best thing you can do with someone who's struggling is hand them a rag if they spill something,
right,
as opposed to making a big deal that you spilled it. The other one was congruency, which is, walk the talk, make sure you're living what you preach. I'll stop there before I get too stuck, but they were key points. In fact, in our programs that we developed over the years, if I take a moment to tell you a little bit about that, we developed programs for the NFL. I actually created Play 60, which is now still on television. It was called Play back when I developed it with Bill Walsh. And we developed what we called a kid curriculum, was designed to match the systemic nature of children. We went on and created that program. We did it for Major League Soccer. We had 300,000 kids, 500 coaches around the country working at it. Did it with Jack Nicklaus, Golden Bear, and Jim Flick. Developed programs for Boy Scouts of America and JCC, and they were all based on this philosophy that strength and talent is the key to getting people to perform well, which gave us a petri dish, if you will, of many, many years and over millions of kids and interactions and training of coaches to get us to where we are now in terms of understanding, it sounds funny, what we were actually doing. Why did it work? And we think we have that formula now. I don't know that it's perfect, but we think we have that formula.
So, one of the questions I always wondered, like you deal with kids a lot, right? With your camps, and you and I have talked about other camps. But, when you started, did you say like, okay, if I go to adults, it's going to be hard to change them? But if I go to kids, we can create a new way that kids think, listen, learn, and then be positive out in the world. Did you think about it that way? Or did you know what I mean? Like, because if you go to a bunch of adults who have, are parents and everything, and you're trying to say, you're doing this wrong, sometimes they oppose it. They don't know why, they just oppose it because they don't want somebody telling them what to do. So I was wondering if kids, you kind of can build in that understanding of positivity, because not all parents are positive. And I've talked about that. Like after a game, riding home in the car, how do you handle your kids? What's the best thing to do? Parents are asking those questions all the time.
All the time, as they should. Well, given that I was a teacher for many, many years, I was a teacher who everybody else gave me the kids that they couldn't handle, kids that were failing, kids that were discipline problems. And I could tell you then what I did to help change that, but I couldn't tell you why it worked, but I can now. So kids are, I think humans basically are born to be positive and productive. I mean, smiling is one of the first things that we learn how to do. And I think the problem with adults is we have a tendency to get locked into certain behaviors. And then we ultimately lock children into those same behaviors. So it was easier to work with kids. You're right. There are adults asking those questions now. And we can answer them.
So when you kind of brought this philosophy up to Bill Walsh, when you wanted to create Play 60, what was his answer? Like did he understand it all, or was he just the part of the football part for the camps?
Well, as I said before, excuse me, Gus, as I said before, there are many positive, productive people in this world. Our research was to research those people to find out what were they doing and why did it work. So when I met Bill Walsh, he was one of those people. He basically said to me when I first met him, I have no idea why everybody's making this big fuss over the way I coach. He said, I coach the same way now that I did when I was in high school. He said, it's pretty simple. You just treat your people right, provide the right content, and if you got the right talent, you're going to get success. And he's right. And he was really a gentleman. And we translated his football knowledge into activities that were systemic to 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 18-year-olds. And he was fascinated by it, as was Jim Flick with Jack Nicklaus, in the whole idea of how do you create content that matches the development of the person, which is why we called it a kidriculum. Jim Flick said to me, he said, where were you when I was raising my daughter? I said, well, that's a hard question to answer, but I think I know what you mean. Yeah. And I said, why? And he said, well, I work with Jack Nicklaus, the best golfer in the world, and I'm his coach, and I wanted to get my daughter involved in the game. And he said she didn't want anything to do with it. He said she's now 33 or whatever it was then, and she loves the game. But he said when she was a kid, and he said, I now understand that I was trying to push the adult version of golf onto her, and she was a kid who wasn't willing to accept it, probably because she didn't understand it. And he was exactly right.
Yeah, no, it sounds like I've been through that with my sons, and now they love it. And they're like, Dad, why don't you help us play when we were little? And I'm like, well, you didn't want to, you know what I mean? So there's a way to understand and do that. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Huddle Up with Gus. You can check me out at huddleupwithgus.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, or you can follow me on social media at Huddle Up with Gus. We're talking with my good friend, Dr. Russell here. He's the creator of Winning Profile. And also, as you've heard, the Kidriculum, which this program is amazing. Camps and people should be training this way. I think it's incredible. He talked about how he took Bill Walsh's football brain and changed it into products that kids can play as they get older. And Gary, I'm sure that it's not the same from 8 years old on up. It has to change.
Oh, without a doubt. If you understand children, let's talk about a 7-year-old, 8-year-old child. They live in a world which is called concrete experience, which means every activity that they do is concrete in its nature, and they don't have anything abstract about it. Translate what I just said, they don't understand the concepts of positions. They can tell you them through their language, which gives adults the idea, well, maybe they actually understand this. If anybody out there has ever watched a soccer match of 11 kids versus 11 at age 7, it looks like magnet ball, bees on honey. And they all follow the concreteness of the ball around. And everybody on the sidelines is yelling, spread out, get away from each other, pass it. They don't have any idea what you're talking about. As those years progress, around the age of 10, 11, and 12, they get into abstract functional thought process. This is why we teach algebra in 8th grade or 7th grade. I still don't know why we teach algebra at all, because when I took it, it was A plus B equals C. Now that makes no sense.
Right.
but to translate that information, you have to be at a certain mental stage to understand it. So it isn't until about the age of 10, 11, 12, where kids actually begin to really understand positional play and begin to be able to, in the soccer terms, support one another to make things work. In your language of football, it's knowing where the ball is going to come before it comes, all those things that are abstract to children, but to adults, they can functionally handle that.
That makes a lot of sense. That, obviously the brain is still developing and growing and creating those neurons. And now that you've studied that and then seen that, and you went through this whole curriculum, what was your next process? Because I don't think you had winning profile at that point, or did you?
No, I've almost done things backwards, which is probably not unlike my profile, by the way. But what I actually did was study medicine, not to become a practitioner, because I wanted to develop a model in people or psychology that was like medicine. Medicine's all about systems and understanding the structure of human anatomy. And once you master those, you can become a practitioner. But when I looked into the psychology field and all the other instruments that were being used to measure talent or personality, they were all qualitative in nature. Sorry about it. Let me explain what I mean by qualitative. If I go to the emergency room today and I tell the nurse or doctor what I'm feeling, that's qualitative information. Valid, but if they flipped me on the table and took my appendix out at that moment, that would be a lawsuit. That's not going to happen. So what do? They put you in the hospital and they run tests to gain quantitative information to back up the qualitative. Everything in psychology has been basically qualitative, what people think or what people feel. Not bad, but too linear, and we're not linear. So I wanted to develop a model that would parallel the idea of a medical model, so that when I look at a human being, and if I had had the chance to work with you, we've talked about this, when you were younger, I would create a model around you of what we know now about performance and talent, teach you that model, teach people around you that model. And I believe, after watching you for years, you would have been even more successful than you've already been. I mean, look how many mistakes we make now. Brady going in the 6th round. I don't know who made that choice, but they shouldn't be working anymore. We were wrong. Yeah. Russell Wilson. We could go on and on with people that we've missed. And it's no different than if I didn't have a medical model to treat you, you might get sicker and you might die. In sport, we just end up going away. And we miss people who could have been a lot better than we would if we understood what was going on with that person at that time.
Well, and you can also look at it the other way, right? So I take a first rounder and I think he's really good, right? Which is qualitative. We don't really know, but I think he's going to be great because we're going to draft him in the first round, and then he ends up doing nothing his whole career. And whether it's because, would you say that's because the coaches didn't understand his profile or who he was, Is that a big part of it to why that person didn't go on to be better?
Yeah. So if you look at what we're doing, even in the world today, in business and in sport, we use physicality or optics to make choices. And the reality is, whether it's Tom Brady, you, or whoever it might be, at the moment that we're looking at those optics, we don't know what's going on in here in our head, our mental capacity. So part of our profile is to measure that. What are you like cognitively? How do you problem solve? How do you think? How do you make decisions and choices? In your world as a quarterback, those choices better happen pretty quick. And you need to have the talent to be able to do that. And you've seen quarterbacks who come out, they're supposed to be great, and they just can't seem to read the game. And that's a mental process that we can't see. So we've developed a model to measure that. The other part of it is emotion or emotive. How do you attach yourself to the world? Is it through people, through logic, both? And we know the emotional part of the game, keeping that under control, is huge. So we developed a process that measures that, as well as what are you going to be like under pressure? How do you handle that? What do you do? And then we measure physicality, which is obviously obvious to do. We put those together, we triangulate that information with an algorithm, and we come out with a three-dimensional psychological outline of you. Every coach that ever coached you should have had that. You should have had it. Your parents should have had it. Schools should have it, because it's unlocking that potential. To me, that's what winning is all about. It isn't necessarily a score, although I would say that if somebody's not worried about winning, they're the person I want to play next. So it is all about maximizing someone's God-given talent that you're born with. That's what we know now. We know that talent is the pre-wired condition that we have at birth, and it's done through the study of neurology.
So if I was a parent and I said, "Hey, look, doc, I don't understand all this high level talk. Give me," if I said, "I come to you as a parent, I want my kids to be the best people they can be, whether it's they're on the field playing, they're at home, they're out in public, whatever. I need to understand them better. Give me a layman's term of, the cake. We know the cake's not finished. So what are we going to do to get this cake to taste like it should?"
Well, I think generally speaking, up until about the age of 10, 11, 12, we should just let kids be kids and just have fun. We shouldn't be trying to coach them, direct them, lead them. We should be encouraging them to play. Play is like oxygen. And the more kids have an opportunity to play under the idea that it's supposed to be fun and we're supposed to enjoy what we're doing, as opposed to keeping a league score, a table, and all those things. If you notice the numbers of kids in sport today, they're dropping. And I think a lot of it has to do with not being able to go out in the dirt like I did and just play without adult supervision. Just let them have fun, have a good time. The other thing I think that's really key, especially with talent now that we know, is as you're watching kids play, look for the things that they're able to do without thinking anything academic. So for kids that are extremely verbal, we know that they have the ability to lead because they can talk and communicate. For the kids who are very quiet and kind of reserved and sit back, they need more opportunity to have an opportunity to get involved. So if you are helping to organize things, it's generally the kids that are loud and stand out that get all the attention, and the kids that are not loud and reticent kind of sit in the back, and won't be long they won't show up for the next activity because they don't think they're involved.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so everyone, if you're out there and you have kids, let them play, let them enjoy their time. Don't force them to do anything they don't want to do. I think it's part of that, right? Because kids are so nowadays, Gary, where they're in their house, they're playing video games, and I don't think that's bad, but I think that they need other activities. Hey, everyone, Welcome to Huddle Up with Gus. If you just joined us, I'm talking with my good friend, Dr. Gary Russell. We were just talking about, how to bake the best cake you can. So in terms of, how do we raise our kids? How do we understand them? What should we do to have the best kid that's on the field, off the field, at home, everywhere else? And Gary's given us a deep look into the weeds about how to do that. You can check me out at Huddle Up with Gus, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So Dr. Russell created this company called Winning Profile. And Gary, you've done all these things over career. Like you said, you've been studying this for 50 years. Why Winning Profile, and why take everything that you just told us and say, I got to package this and I got to figure out how to deliver this to many people as I can?
Well, let me just give you a little bit more background. I think, the idea that Bill Walsh and we came up with is play. That was what Play 60 is now called. And the idea was to develop a curriculum that was systemic to children and for us to get out of the way as adults. We did that. We did it in other sports. The key to the difference of us is our work is based on the science of neurology. Now, I may bore some people with this information, but it's really important to understand that when children are born, their heads are bigger than their bodies. And the reason for that is there's an overabundance of neurons that begin to start a process 60 days before birth, 2 days after birth, a tremendous burst of activity. That goes on from those days up to the age of 16. Those neurons begin to weave themselves into three threads, which we now call behavior, our mental, emotional, and actional components. The model basically takes all of the science of that, and we created a profile to measure that, so that when we work with someone like yourself, where children probably around the age of 11 or 12, when their language is good enough to take an assessment, we can begin to assess the talent that that person has. Now, talent isn't what you do. It isn't football. It isn't golf. It isn't math. Talent is the way you are put together, the way you're wired, if you will. The beauty of what we know from science now is the concept of neuroplasticity, which means your talent themes that we measure can be coached. They can move, they can get stronger. Whereas the old theory was whatever you were born with, that's it. That's just, sorry, Gus. That's just not the way it is. So we now know once we gain a profile of a person and we teach the person the profile, which doesn't take long, and the people around that person, we can actually create activities that give you structure and lessons of how to use this talent to improve yourself. So that begins to improve performance. That's using your talent, and we use your behavioral components to do it. It's exciting, it works. And the latest step that we've created is what we call human analytics. We can now profile 1,000 people. And if we want to replace Gus Farrat, I'm not doing that, Gus, but if we wanted to, we could put 1,000 people in the database and find out from this internal data that we've created, who looks like you more than anybody else from the inside, not just what we see on the outside.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, you and I talk a lot about talent, and it's not just that. We see a lot of people that have talent, but their emotional and their mental side is not, it's not equal. And those things all have to be equal to be the best you can be. But I wanted to ask you, give me an example of an athlete that you've worked with that you really felt like you've helped them understand themselves, exceed beyond their expectations.
Well, the one that stands out to me the most is a lady, her name is Mel Reed. She's English. She plays in the Solheim Cup. And we met her when she was 19. And when we profiled her, in her emotive component, she had competition lower in her profile than any other athlete we had seen. Not bad, but lower. And the gentleman named Sir Clive Woodward that I was working with, who was the performance director in the British Olympics, looked at me and said, "What do we do now?" And I said, "Well, what we do now is teach the people around her what that theme is." And the theme was competition, which you would expect in great athletes.
Right.
We took that theme got the team around her to coach her, no different than you would do in a business. And over 6 months, we tried to enhance that theme of competition, which we did. And in 6 months, she became Rookie of the Year in Europe. She was then ranked number 1, and she's still playing. Her goal was always to get to number 1. She's not there yet, but she's still working at it. So you could actually see the improvement. The process that we use with an athlete, why we're doing this, is to journal, because journaling takes everything that you're experiencing and pulls it together. And we literally taught her how to feel her themes so that as she journaled, which is qualitative information,
Right.
she was beginning to sense that things were happening and getting better. The quantitative data was easy. Her score dropped. And that was a way of showing her and the team how she was changing and moving forward.
So a lot of your themes have been working with athletes, and we're talking about that, but actually it's for everyone, with neuroplasticity and the understanding of that, and that we can all increase or change what we know or understanding of how to do things. Because I know that you've worked with major companies as well across the United States. And so tell me when you figured out that, oh, this isn't just for athletes, and figuring out that this is for anybody in the workplace. When did that happen for you?
Well, I always felt it was going to happen, but I didn't have proof. So simply speaking, we can go into a place like Morgan Stanley now, or big retail groups, or I'm working with Etihad Airlines now, and we can get a person or a team of people, and you can begin to see the patterns that they have that are like Olympians, or like your profile. They have everything but the physicality to do a sport. They have the mental capacity, which is grit. It's all about handling pressure. It's about leadership. It's about all these qualities that we're looking for in people. The problem when you interview people and use a resume, you can't see those. So we make mistakes. The research says we're hiring 1 out of 5 people correctly in this country.
Wow.
Not great. Not a great percentage. And the reason is because we're not measuring the right things. I get excited when I say this, because if you had an MRI or X-ray in medicine, we'd be able to see things. That's pretty simple.
Right.
Psychology, we don't see things. So our profile provides an MRI or an X-ray of how you're put together psychologically. So you can begin to get patterns of people who are leaders and patterns of people who are followers. We need people to know how to follow.
Right.
So we can do all of that. We can profile teams so that we can get a scattering of talent in a team. And we can see if there's any outliers in that team, which might be slowing that team down. They would be the first people that you might want to replace. It's so exciting to be able to predict and help people understand themselves so that they can make better choices and perform at a higher level.
Yeah. So usually when you think of psychology and getting to know someone, and, my wife Ann's a therapist, as you know, and to try and figure out them, it takes time. The visits aren't, they're an hour once every other week, or, whatever it is, it takes time. So how have you, with Winning Profile, how's it streamlined that process of understanding as a coach that your player or even yourself?
Well, if you think of medicine, if I went into the hospital and I explained all my symptoms and people had to take a lot of time to figure out what I'm saying, I could be dead.
Right.
We don't have time. So the beauty of this process is that when we're working with a person in a company, for example, or on a sporting team, we want to get analysis, quantitative analysis quickly. So we can profile someone in a matter of 50 minutes, turn that profile around back to them, and begin teaching them these principles. And the way we work with people, I'm working with someone right now in New York City who has been struggling in his job, but everybody feels he has the talent to do it. So it's taken us now about 5 or 6 weeks, and we're already beginning to see his behavior change back to what they thought they would get.
Yeah.
So the beauty is you don't have to wait a year. You couldn't do that in medicine. You can do it in 5 or 6 weeks. And this whole idea of performance review in business, where we review performance 3, 6, and 12 months, is nuts. It's crazy.
Yeah. What do they review? They review how many widgets you sold, right? So it's not really figuring out why they say, well, you got to sell more. That's not helping me.
Well, it would be like me telling you that 6 games ago you threw 6 incompletions. You would look at me and say, well, thanks very much. I already know that. Yeah. And what good is it going to do me now? So the beauty of this process is it's now. It's in the moment. So we're not looking back. We already know something's going on. We're looking forward, this is why our process gives you what we call lead indicators. It tells you what a person should be like. Everybody else works with lag indicators, which tells you what you did yesterday. Thanks very much. I already know that.
Right.
So we got to move forward, and this process is accelerating that.
So you were talking before about the triangulation that you do. So give me those 3 points that you're using to figure that out.
Well, neurologically, our threads connect to 3 components of behavior: mental, cognitive, which is really problem solving, thinking, choices, 1. 2, emotion. How do we attach ourselves to the world? Do we do it through people, EQ, emotional intelligence? Do we do it through logic and things, IQ, which is logic and reasoning? Or do we have some combination of both? And then the third area is physicality. What are we like under pressure? We take those 3 instruments. It took us 2 years to develop an algorithm that would triangulate that information, which basically brings it all together. Your response was, I think if I can quote you, is that when you read your profile, you had a sense about yourself, but what you learned was information, terms, and details that literally explain probably in greater detail than you've ever had about yourself.
Yeah. When I first worked with you and you did my profile, you get a sheet that really tells you all the stories. You're taking 3 different types of tests, and we're understanding everything you just talked about. But now you guys have streamlined it into, you're working on streamlining it into more of an app so that we can get everything right on our phone and we can understand ourselves better and get to things quicker, like you're talking about, and try to be the best person we are faster.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the key. People don't want a hamburger 5 hours from now. They want it when I order it. And we're no different. We're very impatient as people. And we're doing that because we want to get better. So you're absolutely right. We're able now to take all this information. Our app isn't 100% working the way we want it to yet, but we can still provide all the information. But eventually, that's exactly what we want to do. We want a person to be sitting in a room, a team of people, and be able to look across the table and say, Gus Farrat, how does he think? How does he feel? And what's his actions under pressure? The person across the room is going to be looking at you. What that does is help the 2 of you know how to communicate with each other, how to interact with each other. You know what it is that the person's like to be able to explain things better. All of that speeds up the individual, speeds up the team, speeds up the performance. And in sport, especially at the pro level, time is crucial because you don't have an hour to figure out a play. You have to figure out things at the moment 11 people begin to move against another 11. And those things happen in milliseconds. So all of this is designed to make it easier, handier, and be able to communicate clearly what's going on with you and the people around you.
Yeah, and I think as a coach, you look at, we talk about the NFL all the time and the combine, it starts there when they're young. You're getting kids that are 22 years old. And if it takes you 10 years to figure it out, the average life in the NFL is only 2.5 years. So I think with the profile, with what you're doing, a coach could take this, or even the combine, which isn't coaching. It's just, hey, we're figuring out who all these kids are. Wouldn't that be a great place for a winning profile to be?
Oh, absolutely. When you think about the combine, and I'm not trying to be critical of the NFL, but I think 90% of the time is spent on physicality, running, jumping, leaping, lifting. and not a lot is spent on, quote unquote, talking with another human being, let alone reading a diagnostic instrument that tells you how this person thinks, how this person emotes, all the things that you really need to make a choice. My ultimate dream is 7.5 people, 7.5 billion people on this planet all have a profile, just like a fingerprint. And I believe every human being should know what their profile is so that they can maximize themselves with their parents, with schools, with coaches, in business. And this isn't a process to select or eliminate people. This is a process to match internal talent with the role that you expect that person to play. Big difference in what I just said. Most people look at being selected as elimination. This is all about finding the right fit, the right person, not just for the role, but most importantly for the person. Because if the person goes into a role that isn't them, they're not going to be happy.
Right.
We use an instrument in this country right now called an engagement score, which means are people totally wrapped up in what they're doing? And we have the highest score in the world, which I think is 37%. And that's awful. We should be doing everything in our power to get that 37 up to 100% of people being totally happy and feeling well about who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, it is so true in what you just said. We all have to be happy. And if you're not happy at work or wherever it is, on a team, with your parents, things can go awry quickly. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me on Huddle Up with Gus. We're having a great discussion about the psychology of the human. And Gary's still teaching me so much. I'll never learn it all. He's been doing it for 50 years. But check me out at Huddle Up with Gus if you want to watch this episode again or hear more tidbits. We'll put it out on social media and some good clips so that you can catch Dr. Russell and understand what he's doing so that you can make yourself better. So Gary, we've discussed a lot. You've really gone through. So tell me, I know the one here in Pittsburgh where I live, and you've been here. Your son lives here. You've been in Pittsburgh for a while, and you worked with a great company here, and you really turned them around and gave them an understanding of what they should be and how they should treat people, and that increased their profits. So tell me a little bit about when you worked with Giant Eagle.
Well, it's interesting. John Luco, who was the president at that time, when I met him, he said, "You have 15 minutes." And I went, "Okay." So I began to explain what we did and how we did it. And I used the example of Tom Brady as us not being able to read people correctly. And he perked up and he said, I have store leaders that are generally great. He said, but every once in a while, we pick the wrong person. We think we know what we're doing, but we don't have the right person. And I said, well, you're using the wrong instrument. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're not measuring the right things. And I went through what I had just explained to you. So they brought me in, and I ended up profiling about 220 of their store leaders. And we developed a model that basically matched the top people. In other words, we knew quantitatively who the top store leaders were. And we then developed a profile of that top people. And then as they would hire people, they would use this template to help them understand, are they hiring the right people? John, after me being there 3.5 years, he retired and he's now the president of our board. So, and he called me and he said, what you did here was fantastic. I want to help you grow this business to help other people. And he's done that. So and they did increase their profits. And I'd love to say it was strictly because of me, but I can't. But, helping people to change the mindset of positive thinking, positive modeling, strength-based coaching, developing culture of choices and freedom, like I mentioned earlier, was all a part of it. We took a store, one of their big stores, 500 employees, And we measured their level of engagement in the store, which for Giant Eagle was like 66 out of 100, much better than the national average.
Right.
I asked them, what would 1% of improvement in engagement do to their P&L statement? They said, we don't know. And I said, well, we're going to find out. So I took 35 of their top leaders, trained them in this winning profile. They then went and worked with the 500 employees. And in 4 months, we changed the level of engagement by 12 points. And each point was worth $150,000. And it was interesting. The gentleman who ran the store up until that point, he said, up until now, he said, I wasn't sure about you. And he said, but now that I've seen the P&L change, I'm convinced. So we were able to model that process in a store. And that's what I've been doing with other companies ever since.
So bringing it back to sports a little bit, this offseason, we've seen a lot of coaches get fired. We've seen general managers get fired, new coaches come in. And it seems like this process happens every year, right? There's no long-term. The Steelers are like one of the only teams that keep their head coach. What do you think? My question is, if you're going to a franchise and you want to go in and you want to help them with winning profile, I believe that everyone from the top, the owner down, should understand their profile, because I feel like the owner also needs to have a match, that a GM and a coach that they understand and get along with.
Absolutely. Every year this happens, and I really feel for these people who are trying to make a living and trying to make it work, and it isn't working. I don't think anybody knows why it isn't working. We blame it on the football's not the right shape and the grass isn't green enough, and I'm being facetious, but we don't really look at the systemic issues that are going on. So if you're going to hire someone, then everybody in the organization, as you just said, should be profiled so they understand what they're looking at. And then when you profile someone, you develop a template of what you're looking for. And then you profile to find out with the MRI idea, does the person have this? And then do they have the supporting staff around them that has the right profile to make it all pulled together? The beauty of Bill Walsh is that there are people like him who seem to kind of just do it naturally. But they're few and far between, as we've seen year after year after year. And I'm not trying to be disparaging to any individuals, but I think anybody who goes up to become a head coach of an NFL team, if anybody needs a profile, it's them. So they understand who they are, what are their talents, and what do they need around them to make it all work. But if it were me, I would profile everybody in the whole organization.
Yeah, because I can give you 1,000 examples of the time I spent in the NFL and when I would deal with coaches that didn't understand me. Just for an example, I'll give you, when I was with Washington, I was a pound overweight. I was supposed to weigh 228. I weighed 229. Nothing was said to me, and all of a sudden I get a fine sheet in my locker that says you're a pound overweight and it costs you $350. And I take it to the coach and I said, what's going on? He said, you were a pound overweight. It's in the rules. And I said, it's weight, I could lose it. And, I probably go out to practice, come in for practice and be 3 pounds under. And instead of understanding me and working with me and just making it a positive thing, it turned into a very negative thing. And I had a lot of, I don't know what, animosity towards the coaching staff then.
Well, you hear this all the time, not just you. The problem is, Gus, we don't have a model. We don't have a medical model would have a system that we follow. It's maybe not perfect, but it's pretty good. And we would learn very quickly with the research that we've done that punishing people for a pound and charge them is just, excuse the expression, ass backwards. It's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing with kids, older kids, and especially men, grown men. Instead of having a dialogue and understanding that person and working out a problem, getting back to freedom and choice and communication, we go to this nonsense that we've had for 400, 500 years of punishing someone to get what we want out of them. It doesn't work. It appears that it works because basically people pay the fine and comply. But what we don't know is what they're thinking as they're doing it, which is not good. They're not happy.
Right.
And they're resentful. And it's the very thing that we just talked about with children. These things are modeled from the pros down to kids and kids' leagues. We have a football league here in my town, and I get down and watch it. What do I see? Adults screaming at kids, putting their finger in their face, pushing them, doing all the things that we see, unfortunately, at the adult level. And I just shake my head, and it just breaks my heart to see this going on. These are kids, these are children that are learning how to get along with each other. Now we live in a world, and for here I'm getting philosophical, we're living in a world where everybody's pushing each other.
Yeah, and we see it in sports programs. There was just one on TV the other night where a hockey player in youth hockey came off the bench and went up and started fighting a parent. Like, that kind of stuff is uncalled for. I get it. You have to understand what's going on, and parents, we always say parents have to be the bigger people, right? But they also don't understand themselves and why they do these things. So Gary, we only have a minute left. Give me a little bit of how we can connect with you, how all of our fans can find you, and if they want to really understand Winning Profile and change their lives, what they can do to do that.
Well, thanks for that offer. My email address is gary.russell@winningprofile.com. Certainly somebody can contact me there. And I would be glad to have a chat with you about what this is about in greater depth for you. And I would encourage everybody to be looking for models like ours that are based on positive psychology, are based on research, based on information that will help things get better.
Yeah. So go to winningprofile.com, check out Dr. Russell and his whole staff. If you're an adult, if you are somebody who wants to be better, if you have kids, you want to understand them better, understand yourself first, and then go and help understand your kids. Be happy, be positive. That's what it's all about, Gary. I think you're doing an incredible job. And, whatever I can do to help you push this out there, we need it more in our country now than we ever have before.
Well, I'm blessed to know you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on and joining me. So go check Dr. Russell out at winningprofile.com. Remember, he's worked with many, many athletes, many companies. If you want to do the same thing, improve your company, improve the way you play, you got to understand yourself. Go to winningprofile.com. That's it, everyone. Thanks for joining me on Huddle Up with Gus. We'll see you next week. And I appreciate you all listening. Go to huddleupwithgus.com, where you can check out all kind of cool things on my website. It's being improved as we speak. And then wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, check me out. And then go on to social media at Gus Farrat. You can follow me there, or you can go to at Huddle Up with Gus and follow us there as well. So I appreciate you joining me. Another great show. And I want to thank Dr. Russell again for joining us. Have a great weekend, everyone.
And that's a wrap, sports fans. Thanks for joining in the fun at the 1631 Digital Studios for another action-packed Huddle Up with Gus, featuring 15-year NFL quarterback Gus Farrat. Huddle Up with Gus is proudly produced by 1631 Digital Media and is available on Apple Music,